Now, the leader of a Kenyan doomsday sect has gone on trial over the deaths of more than 400 of his followers in one of the world's worst cult-related tragedies. Paul Mackenzie is said to have incited people to starve to death so they could meet Jesus. He's now accused of multiple counts of manslaughter. DW's East Africa Bureau Chief Marielle Muller reports.
Hundreds of buried bodies were found in this remote stretch of land near the coastal city of Malindi. Many of them starved to death. Some had been strangled and bludgeoned. Only a few narrowly survived. What happened? This man, a former taxi driver turned self-proclaimed pastor named Paul Mackenzie, brainwashed people into thinking they would meet Jesus if they starved themselves and even their children to death. Believing his preaching that the world would soon come to an end, and with COVID stoking those fears, many followed his order. Survivor Salama Masha was pressured to obey the pastor's orders by her husband.
I asked him how the kids would fast if there was food inside the house. He said the kids needed to fast and that they would eat once they died and met Jesus.
From 2020 to 2023, at least 436 cult members died. In a country that counts itself among Africa's most modern and stable nations, people have struggled to understand how law enforcement missed the signs. How did Mackenzie, who had a history of extremism and clashes with the law, manage to keep his death cult hidden for so long? The government has been trying to regain the nation's trust.
The government of Kenya will do whatever it takes to make sure that we convict Mr. Mackenzie and all those who helped him perpetrate his heinous crimes, that they pay with the severest and most painful punishment available.
Mackenzie and 94 of his helpers are now facing charges of murder, terrorism, manslaughter, among other crimes. They have pleaded not guilty to all charges. And while multiple trials are expected to last up to several years, new mass graves are still being found. Only 34 out of 436 bodies have been identified so far and can only now be returned to their relatives.
Well, that report from DW's East Africa Bureau Chief, Marielle Muller, who joins us now from outside the court in Mombasa. Welcome, Marielle. What happened in court today?
So you have to know Mackenzie and his 94 co-defendants are facing different charges in different courts. This is just one trial of 4. So he's facing charges of terrorism, of murder, of child abuse and manslaughter. And that's what this trial here is about. 238 counts of manslaughter. And you have to, if you're now confused with all these numbers, because 429 bodies have been found in the forest. Why only 238 counts of manslaughter? Well, 191 of the 400, more than 400, were actually children. So the prosecution said they didn't have a choice. They were forced from their parents or from other adults to starve themselves to death. And the adults were either forced or helped by Mackenzie and his co-defendants. And the prosecution says they have lined up 90 witnesses to prove that case, and they say this is the worst case of religious extremism in Kenya. The defense, in turn, said no, all they did was covered by the constitutional right of freedom of expression, of assembly, and of religion.
And how was it possible for this cult leader to spread his ideology unnoticed for so long?
Well, that's a question that the whole country has been wondering and discussing for a year now. So Mackenzie was actually arrested twice before all these people died, in 2017 and 2019, on charges of radicalization and also spreading extremist beliefs. But he was acquitted. So people are wondering, how did that happen and why? And so you have to know that the context of this country, there are 80% Christians here in Kenya, and evangelical churches play a huge role. They have huge influence. The First Lady herself is an evangelical preacher. She and her husband, the President, William Ruto, are good friends with very famous televangelists. So Mackenzie, he started off as a televangelist. He had his own broadcasting channel where he would broadcast his sermons all over the country and even abroad. So people would even say, later in interviews, they became addicted. The problem with that is that these churches are not registered here in Kenya. So there's no oversight of what they're preaching, what they're telling their followers. And this has become a problem. In this case, it has turned out to be very dangerous. But many people said in the beginning, he sounded like any other evangelical preacher. He promised to be able to heal HIV or cancer or other diseases. He gave us hope. He made us feel seen and feel heard, because he was also a taxi driver before he became a self-proclaimed pastor. So he was actually giving us an option and actually, a positive path in life.
And what's the government done since the first bodies were found last year to prevent other cults from causing more harm?
So first of all, they cracked down on other cults that they already knew are also radical, but that they have tolerated. And so they cracked down on these ones. Then the president instated a law, a task force, and they reviewed the legal framework that religious organizations are embedded here in the country. And they found, well, we need an oversight body, we need to correct this, and we need a monitoring system. So now also they recommended an amendment to the Information and Communications Act here in Kenya, so that there's more control over what is being broadcasted from these religious organizations and churches. And then they also found there's a huge lack of what's actually being posted online on social media, because many of the followers of Mackenzie also said they were following it on their phones every day. And so, this is something that the government really needs to work on, and they have identified the problems, but it really remains to be seen if they have the manpower and the financial resources to actually do that.
And what of the followers? Why would anyone willingly watch their own children starve to death?
Well, it's incomprehensible, but when you talk to people, followers, they said, as I already mentioned, he was one of us. He made us feel seen and heard. We thought, he was talking about this wonderful place where we could meet Jesus. And in the beginning, it was harmless, he just was promising where, so for example, a mother said, my daughter is suffering a mental disease. So I was hoping that he could cure her. And others were just desperate in life and eager to get on, and they hoped that he could help them. The moment when they realized this is actually dangerous for me or for my children, often it was too late. Some people tried to escape, but they were already convinced to move to this very remote place where they were promised a piece of land, and they were told, this is a sanctuary, we can all live in peace here. Once they were there, they were told, you actually have to starve to death. Your children first, the women, and then the men. And Mackenzie and his family would be last. So then, if people tried to escape, they were also brutally killed.
Okay, thank you for that, Mariel Amola in Mombasa.